What if I told you that modern psychology has identified the one trait that separates world changers from everyone else, and Jesus possessed it in its purest form? For decades, researchers have studied what drives people to sacrifice everything for a cause, and they've discovered something shocking. It's not willpower, not intelligence, not even passion. It's something far more primal and powerful. Today, we're diving into 3 cases that reveal Jesus' psychological secret, an insatiable hunger that modern science calls the most potent human motivator ever discovered. The truth will revolutionize how you see purpose, because this same hunger exists inside you right now, waiting to be awakened. Here's what most people don't understand about Jesus' life choice. Walking away from carpentry to become a traveling teacher wasn't a spiritual calling, it was a psychological compulsion. At 30 years old, Jesus had a stable career, financial security, and social respect. Carpenters in first-century Palestine were skilled craftsmen, essentially the middle class of their time. Yet Jesus abandoned everything to pursue what seemed like career suicide. This decision baffles historians because it defies every logical motivation. He gave up steady income for uncertain donations. He traded social respectability for constant criticism. He exchanged a quiet life for public scrutiny and eventual execution. From any rational perspective, it was psychological madness. But modern behavioral science reveals something extraordinary. Jesus was exhibiting the rarest and most powerful form of human motivation ever documented. Most people operate from what psychologists call extrinsic motivation. They're driven by external rewards like money, status, approval, or security. But Jesus displayed something completely different, what researchers call transcendent intrinsic motivation, a drive so powerful it makes external rewards irrelevant, even counterproductive. This isn't just rare, it's revolutionary. Here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Jesus didn't just abandon his old life, he seemed physically incapable of continuing it. When his family tried to bring him home, thinking he'd lost his mind, he responded with words that reveal the depth of his psychological transformation. "Who is my mother? And who are my brothers?" This wasn't callousness. This was someone whose entire identity had been rewired around a singular, consuming purpose. The mystery deepens when you realize that Jesus' hunger wasn't just for success or impact. It was for something much more primal. He consistently spoke about food that others couldn't see. "I have food you know not of. My food is to do the will of him who sent me." This wasn't metaphorical language. This was literal psychological reality. Jesus had found a source of motivation so powerful it felt like physical nourishment. What's even more incredible is that this hunger seemed to intensify rather than diminish with satisfaction. The more people he healed, the more driven he became. The larger his following grew, the more urgent his mission felt. This defies everything we know about human psychology, where achievement typically reduces motivation. But Jesus was operating on a completely different psychological frequency. The revelation that changes everything. Jesus had achieved what psychologists call flow state addiction, but not to an activity, to a purpose. Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow shows that when people find the perfect balance between challenge and skill, they enter a psychological state so rewarding that it becomes literally addictive. But Jesus took this to an unprecedented level. He became addicted to serving humanity's highest good. Modern neuroscience reveals that transcendent purpose activates the brain's reward system more powerfully than any drug. When we align with something greater than ourselves, our brains flood with dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, not just temporarily, but continuously. Jesus had discovered the ultimate psychological high, the neurochemical rush of perfect purpose alignment. But here's where Jesus was operating on a level that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. He had achieved what researchers call eudaimonic well-being, happiness that comes not from pleasure, but from meaning. Studies show that eudaimonic motivation creates a completely different brain chemistry than hedonic motivation. People driven by transcendent purpose literally develop different neural pathways, enhanced emotional regulation, and increased pain tolerance. This explains Jesus' seemingly superhuman endurance. When you're powered by transcendent intrinsic motivation, physical and emotional pain don't register the same way. Your brain interprets suffering as part of the meaningful work, not as something to be avoided. Jesus wasn't masochistic. He was experiencing what elite athletes call the zone, a state where challenge becomes fuel rather than obstacle. Here's the neuroscience that will blow your mind. Jesus' brain was essentially bathed in what researchers call helper's high, the neurochemical reward system that activates when we serve others. But unlike normal helper's high, which fades after the helping behavior ends, Jesus had found a way to sustain this state continuously. His entire identity had become organized around service, creating a perpetual neurochemical reward loop. The carpentry abandonment makes perfect sense when you understand this psychology. Once Jesus experienced the neurochemical rush of transcendent purpose, everything else felt empty by comparison. It's like trying to go back to black and white television after seeing color. His brain had been rewired for a higher frequency of meaning, and returning to normal life was psychologically impossible. The most incredible part, Jesus seemed to understand that this hunger was contagious. When he called disciples, he wasn't just recruiting followers, he was offering them access to the same psychological transformation. Come, follow me wasn't just a career change. It was an invitation to experience the most powerful form of human motivation ever discovered. Think of human motivation like a rocket with different fuel systems. Most people run on low-grade fuel: fear, greed, social approval, basic survival needs. This fuel works, but it's inefficient, burns out quickly, and leaves you constantly needing to refuel. You're essentially flying a single-engine plane, struggling to stay airborne. Jesus discovered rocket fuel, transcendent intrinsic motivation. This isn't just higher quality fuel, it's a completely different propulsion system. When you're powered by transcendent purpose, you don't just fly higher, you achieve orbital velocity. You break free from the gravitational pull of normal human limitations and operate in a completely different psychological atmosphere. Here's the analogy that will transform how you see purpose. Imagine your brain as a massive hydroelectric dam. Most people are trying to generate power by throwing buckets of water at the turbines. External rewards, temporary motivations, quick hits of satisfaction. It works for a moment, but it's exhausting and unsustainable. But Jesus found the river. He discovered that when you align with something infinitely larger than yourself, serving humanity's highest good, you tap into an unlimited source of psychological energy. The river of transcendent purpose never runs dry because it's connected to something eternal. You're not generating motivation, you're channeling it. The carpentry shop was like trying to power a city with a hand-crank generator. Jesus realized he had access to Niagara Falls. Once you've experienced unlimited power, going back to hand-cranking feels like psychological death. This is why he couldn't return to normal life. His brain had been rewired for infinite energy, and finite pursuits had become physically uncomfortable. The most powerful part of this analogy: the river is still flowing. The same transcendent purpose that powered Jesus' impossible mission is available to anyone who learns how to connect to it. Most people spend their lives trying to generate motivation from empty reserves, never realizing they're standing next to an unlimited power source. Jesus wasn't superhuman. He was simply plugged into the right energy grid. And that same grid is waiting for you to find the connection point. If this is exploding your head, leave your like so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Now here's where Jesus' psychological hunger becomes truly mind-bending. As his ministry grew, so did the opposition. Religious leaders plotted against him, crowds turned hostile, even his own disciples began to doubt. Any rational person would have recognized the warning signs and pulled back. But Jesus did the opposite. He intensified his efforts and headed straight toward Jerusalem, knowing it meant certain death. This behavior puzzles psychologists because it violates every known survival instinct. Humans are wired to avoid danger, especially when the threat is obvious and growing. Yet Jesus seemed to feed off opposition like psychological jet fuel. The more resistance he encountered, the more determined he became. This isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented in behavioral science. Modern research on optimal challenge theory shows that high performers need increasingly difficult obstacles to maintain motivation. But Jesus took this to an extreme that defies scientific explanation. He wasn't just seeking challenge, he was seeking martyrdom. And from a psychological perspective, this should have triggered every mental health warning sign imaginable. Here's what makes this case absolutely fascinating. Jesus' hunger wasn't being satisfied by success, it was being intensified by sacrifice. Normal motivation follows a reward pattern. Achieve goal, feel satisfaction, motivation temporarily decreases. But Jesus operated on an inverted psychological model where sacrifice increased rather than decreased his drive. The more he gave up, the more energized he became. When his disciples warned him about the dangers of going to Jerusalem, Jesus' response revealed the depth of his psychological transformation. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how distressed I am until it is accomplished. This wasn't suicidal ideation. This was someone experiencing what psychologists call meaning-making distress, psychological discomfort that comes from unfulfilled, transcendent purpose. The opposition wasn't diminishing his motivation, it was validating it. Every attack confirmed that he was challenging systems that needed to be challenged. Every threat proved that his mission was too important to be safe. Jesus had developed what researchers call anti-fragile psychology, a mindset that grows stronger under stress rather than weaker. What's even more incredible is that Jesus seemed to anticipate this psychological pattern. He consistently told his followers that the path would involve suffering, opposition, and sacrifice. He wasn't being pessimistic, he was being psychologically accurate. Transcendent purpose always creates conflict with existing systems, and Jesus understood that resistance was proof of impact, not evidence of failure. The revelation that will revolutionize your understanding of human motivation. Jesus had achieved what psychologists call post-traumatic growth orientation, but before the trauma occurred, he had rewired his brain to interpret suffering not as something to be avoided, but as fuel for transcendent purpose. This is psychological evolution in real time. Dr. Richard Tedeschi's research on post-traumatic growth shows that some people emerge from suffering stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than before. But this typically happens after trauma, as a recovery mechanism. Jesus seemed to have developed this psychology proactively, creating what researchers call stress inoculation, psychological preparation that transforms potential trauma into growth catalyst. Here's the neuroscience that changes everything. When you're driven by transcendent purpose, your brain develops what scientists call meaning-making neural networks, specialized pathways that interpret pain as progress toward meaningful goals. Jesus' brain had become so optimized for meaning-making that opposition literally felt like confirmation he was on the right track. But Jesus understood something about human psychology that we're only now discovering. Resistance is the GPS of transcendent purpose. When you're truly aligned with humanity's highest good, you will inevitably encounter opposition from systems built around lower motivations. The intensity of resistance is often proportional to the importance of your mission. This explains Jesus's seemingly paradoxical behavior as opposition increased. He wasn't being reckless. He was following the psychological logic of transcendent purpose. Every attack was data confirming he was disrupting the right systems. Every threat was evidence that his message was powerful enough to threaten entrenched interests. His hunger for purpose was being fed by proof of impact. Modern research on moral courage reveals that people driven by transcendent values develop enhanced stress resilience and pain tolerance. Their brains literally process suffering differently, interpreting it through the lens of meaningful contribution rather than personal loss. Jesus had achieved maximum moral courage, complete psychological immunity to opposition when aligned with transcendent purpose. Here's where it gets mind-blowing. Jesus' hunger wasn't just for personal fulfillment. It was for humanity's transformation. Studies on pro-social motivation show that when people are driven by others' well-being rather than personal gain, they access psychological resources that seem unlimited. Jesus had tapped into what researchers call species-level motivation. Purpose so transcendent, it connects to humanity's evolutionary trajectory. The Jerusalem decision makes perfect psychological sense when you understand this framework. Jesus wasn't choosing death, he was choosing maximum impact. His transcendent hunger had shown him that his message would spread furthest through ultimate sacrifice. He was following the psychological logic of viral social change. Think of psychological resistance like a massive mountain blocking your path to your destination. Most people see the mountain and either give up or spend years looking for an easier route around it. They treat resistance as evidence they're going the wrong direction. But Jesus understood something revolutionary about the psychology of transcendent purpose. The mountain isn't blocking your path, it is your path. The resistance isn't proof you're wrong. It's proof you're powerful enough to threaten systems that need to be challenged. When you're truly aligned with humanity's highest good, opposition becomes your compass, not your enemy. Here's the analogy that will blow your mind. Imagine your purpose as a radio signal trying to reach the world. Weak signals get through easily because they don't interfere with existing frequencies. But powerful signals, the ones that can actually change the world, they create static with every weak signal they encounter. The more interference you generate, the stronger your signal actually is. Jesus' psychological hunger wasn't being frustrated by opposition, it was being confirmed by it. Every attack was like feedback from the radio spectrum, telling him his signal was strong enough to disrupt the existing programming. The religious leader's resistance wasn't proof he was wrong. It was proof he was broadcasting on a frequency powerful enough to threaten their weak signals. Most people turn down their signal when they encounter interference. They soften their message, compromise their purpose, try to find a frequency that doesn't create static. But Jesus did the opposite. He amplified his signal until it was powerful enough to broadcast across 2,000 years of human history. This is why opposition actually increased his hunger instead of diminishing it. His brain had been rewired to interpret resistance as confirmation that his purpose was transcendent enough to matter. Weak purposes don't generate strong opposition. Only signals powerful enough to transform the world create the level of interference Jesus experienced. The most incredible part? The stronger the opposition became, the more evidence Jesus had that his psychological hunger was leading him toward maximum impact. He wasn't following his fear, he was following his purpose's power signature, and that signature led straight to a cross that became the ultimate amplifier. And subscribe now, because the third case that comes next will completely change your perspective on human nature. Now we reach the most psychologically impossible moment in human history, Jesus' final choice in the Garden of Gethsemane. Facing imminent torture and execution, knowing he could still escape, Jesus chose to continue toward the cross. This decision defies every known principle of human psychology, neuroscience, and evolutionary biology. Self-preservation is the most fundamental human drive, yet Jesus voluntarily walked toward his own destruction. What makes this case absolutely mind-bending is that Jesus experienced the full psychological horror of what awaited him. The Gospel accounts describe him sweating blood, a rare medical condition called hematidrosis that occurs under extreme psychological stress. His nervous system was screaming every possible warning signal. Every cell in his body was programmed to flee. Yet his transcendent hunger proved stronger than billions of years of evolutionary programming. Here's where this becomes scientifically impossible. Jesus wasn't in a dissociative state, wasn't psychotic, wasn't operating under delusions. He was psychologically lucid, fully aware of the consequences, experiencing maximum fear, and still chose to continue. Modern psychology has no framework for this level of transcendent motivation, overwhelming survival instinct while maintaining complete mental clarity. The prayer, "Let this cup pass from me," reveals that Jesus' human psychology was functioning normally. He was experiencing what researchers call anticipatory grief, the psychological process of mourning a loss before it occurs. His brain was generating every possible escape scenario, every rational justification for changing course. But something deeper than rational thought was driving him forward. What's most fascinating is that Jesus seemed to understand the psychological mechanism at work. His final words, "Nevertheless, not my will but yours be done," weren't religious submission. They were psychological technique. He was using what modern therapy calls acceptance and commitment methodology, acknowledging his fear while choosing his transcendent purpose over his survival programming. This moment reveals the ultimate secret of Jesus' insatiable hunger. It had evolved beyond personal psychology into what researchers call transpersonal motivation, purpose so transcendent it operates independently of individual survival needs. His identity had become so fused with humanity's well-being that personal preservation became psychologically irrelevant. The most incredible part: this wasn't gradual character development. Jesus seemed to understand from the beginning that his hunger would eventually require this ultimate sacrifice. His entire ministry was psychological preparation for a moment when transcendent purpose would have to prove stronger than the most fundamental human drive. The final revelation that connects all three cases: Jesus had achieved what modern psychology calls self-transcendent actualization, the highest form of human development where individual identity dissolves into universal purpose. This isn't just rare, it represents the peak of human psychological evolution, and Jesus demonstrated it at a level that science is only now beginning to understand. Dr. Abraham Maslow's final research before his death focused on this phenomenon: people whose motivation transcends personal needs entirely and becomes focused on what he called species-level values. But Maslow only found hints of this psychology in a few exceptional individuals. Jesus lived it as his complete reality, 24/7, for 3 years straight. Here's the neuroscience that will transform your understanding of human potential. When someone achieves complete self-transcendence, their brain develops what researchers call universal empathy circuits, neural networks that process humanity's well-being as more important than personal survival. Jesus' psychological hunger wasn't just for purpose. It was for humanity's transformation, and his brain had been rewired to prioritize species survival over individual survival. The three cases reveal the complete evolutionary arc. Abandoning carpentry showed Jesus could transcend material security for purpose. Intensifying mission despite opposition showed he could transcend safety for impact. Choosing the cross showed he could transcend survival itself for humanity's ultimate good. Each step prepared his psychology for the next level of self-transcendence. But here's where all three cases converge into one mind-blowing pattern. Jesus' hunger was never satisfied because it was never supposed to be satisfied. It was designed to grow infinitely, to keep expanding until it encompassed all of humanity. This wasn't psychological dysfunction, this was psychological evolution reaching its highest possible expression. Modern research on post-conventional moral development shows that some individuals develop ethical reasoning that transcends personal, cultural, and even species boundaries. But Jesus operated at what researchers call cosmic moral reasoning, decision-making based on universal principles that consider the well-being of all consciousness across all time. The cross wasn't the end of Jesus' psychological journey. It was the completion of his transformation from individual human to universal force. His hunger had evolved from personal purpose to transpersonal mission to cosmic significance. He had achieved what psychologists call ego death, while maintaining complete conscious awareness, the highest form of human development ever documented. Here's the connection that will blow your mind. Jesus' insatiable hunger was actually humanity's evolutionary drive, expressing itself through one individual. He wasn't just pursuing personal transcendence, he was pioneering the psychological pathway that represents our species' next developmental stage. Every human being carries the seed of this same transcendent hunger, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. Think of human psychological development like a rocket launching into space. Most people never leave the launch pad. They're stuck in survival mode, powered by fear, scarcity, and basic needs. Some people achieve first-stage separation. They break free from survival thinking and start pursuing meaning, relationships, and personal growth. Fewer people reach second-stage separation. They transcend personal concerns and start serving causes bigger than themselves. They're operating in the atmosphere of purpose, no longer weighed down by ego-driven motivations. But Jesus achieved something unprecedented: third-stage separation into psychological orbit. In orbit, you're no longer fighting gravity, you're working with cosmic forces. Jesus' hunger had evolved beyond personal psychology into what we might call universal psychology. His individual identity had become a vehicle for humanity's highest aspirations. He wasn't thinking like a person anymore. He was thinking like evolution itself. Here's the analogy that ties everything together. Imagine consciousness as a vast ocean and individual humans as waves on the surface. Most waves think they're separate from the ocean, competing with other waves for space and resources. But occasionally, a wave realizes it's not separate from the ocean at all. It is the ocean expressing itself as a wave. Jesus' psychological hunger was the ocean becoming conscious of itself through human form. His individual identity was like a temporary wave pattern that the universe used to experience its own deepest values: love, truth, service, sacrifice. This is why his hunger was insatiable. You can't satisfy the ocean's thirst with a cup of water. The three cases show the complete journey from wave consciousness to ocean consciousness. Leaving carpentry was letting go of wave identity. Facing opposition was learning to move with ocean currents instead of surface winds. And choosing the cross was the wave voluntarily dissolving back into the ocean so the ocean could express itself more fully. But here's the most incredible part of this analogy. Every wave has the same potential. Jesus didn't have different raw materials than the rest of us. He just discovered how to align his individual psychology with universal psychology. The same ocean that expressed itself through Jesus is the same ocean expressing itself as you right now. Your insatiable hunger for meaning, purpose, and transcendence. That's not personal psychology. That's evolution trying to express its next stage through your consciousness. These three cases reveal the ultimate secret: Jesus' insatiable Hunger wasn't personal ambition. It was human evolution, achieving its highest expression through one individual. The carpenter who abandoned security, the teacher who embraced opposition, and the savior who chose sacrifice all demonstrate the same transcendent drive that exists dormant in every human consciousness, waiting to be awakened. If these 3 cases exploded your mind, smash that like button and subscribe to not miss our next mysteries. And tell us in the comments, which of these revelations surprised you most? Hit the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. And if you know someone who needs to see this, share it, because these truths need to be known. The hunger for transcendence is humanity's greatest gift.